with rare smoke-phased turkeys. Where else? At Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. I'm Jane Pauley. We wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. And please join us when our trumpet sounds again next Sunday morning.
Napkin around your neck, Sherry, and we provide the rest. Soup du jour, hot hors d'oeuvre, what?
I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, from the Middle East to the Pacific Rim, America's influence is being tested around the world. The deadly conflict between Israel and Hamas has entered week 7 with no clear end in sight, as Israeli forces intensify efforts to eliminate Hamas in Gaza. Caught in the crossfire, Palestinian civilians, and a society on the brink of collapse. Are we any closer to rescuing more than 200 hostages, some Americans, still held by Hamas? We'll check in with some key players from the Biden administration, Capitol Hill, and around the world. Then, after President Biden's long-anticipated face-to-face meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, what's next for America's relationship with its biggest rival? We'll hear from the bipartisan leaders of Congress's China Committee. Finally, as tempers flare here in Washington,
We'll stand your butt. You stand your butt.
Stop it.
thoughts on the importance of restoring civility in our public discourse. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin with the deteriorating conditions in Gaza and new warnings by the United Nations that disease is a growing concern as civilians shelter in crowded spaces with scarce food and water. Meanwhile, it appears a deal with Hamas to release some hostages in exchange for Israel allowing in some aid to Gaza is taking shape. Qatar's prime minister, who is involved with mediating the talks, said today that an agreement is within reach. Imtiaz Tayyip is in Jerusalem with the latest.
They walked for days from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in their thousands to demand the hostages being held in Gaza be released.
Bring them home now!
And to vent their fury at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's failure to meet regularly with the families of captives.
Our government isn't talking to them, isn't telling them what's going on, what's on the table, what are the offers, what are the reasons for and against. Nothing. Nobody's talking to them.
Multiple parties, including the U.S., have been negotiating for the release of captives, potentially in exchange for a 5-day pause in fighting and a major increase in humanitarian aid. The negotiations remain ongoing as Israel appears to be expanding its offensive against Hamas from northern Gaza to the south, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were told to flee for their safety. But nowhere, it seems, is safe. Massive Israeli airstrikes across Gaza over the past 24 hours have killed dozens of civilians. Many of the victims are children whose tiny bodies were wrapped in white cloth before being taken for burial, as loved ones try to make sense of the incomprehensible. But it's the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City which is being called a death zone. The World Health Organization were able to access it after Israeli forces took control of the main health center earlier this week and are working to evacuate the remaining medical staff and patients, including 32 babies in critical condition. The Israeli military took us to the sprawling hospital complex on a late-night visit to show us what they say is evidence of a Hamas command center that was operating underground, which includes this apparent sand-filled tunnel opening and these weapons. The existence of the apparent Hamas command center, which the U.S. has said it also has intelligence on, has been central to Israel's justification for its assault on the hospital and beyond.
There's been so much damage, so much devastation to this hospital because this hospital was described as a command center for Hamas. Did you find a command center?
Oh, yeah. We found a few.
What would that mean?
Talk about it, but what you see here is a fraction of the equipment we found.
And since our visit, the Israeli military has made multiple statements about the so far underwhelming evidence of the apparent Hamas command center at Al-Shifa, saying we were only shown, quote, preliminary findings, and that more details would be shared soon. Hospitals, of course, have protected status under international law, Margaret, but Israel insists its assault on Gaza's largest and most important medical facility falls within those boundaries.
Great reporting from Imtiaz Tayyib in Jerusalem. We go now to the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner. Good to have you back with us, sir.
Thank you, Margaret.
You've said that absolutely brutal and horrific attack on October 7th by Hamas was a huge intelligence failure. Things were missed, and then there were operational failures, as we know, once that attack was underway. Given those massive blind spots, can the U.S. actually be confident in Israeli intelligence now when it says that what it's doing is with full accuracy?
Well, I think there certainly is a gap that was unexpected with respect to Israel's intelligence gathering. When we saw the failures of October 7th, where they failed to see the emerging horrendous Hamas attack and the taking of hostages that resulted in what you're reporting, we wondered whether or not it was a lack of focus. But now that the United States is actually working with Israel in trying to assist in locating Hamas and understanding Hamas's structure, we're actually understanding that Israel has a gap in also capabilities. Now, of the operational aspects, as you related, because we saw a lack of response after the Hamas attack began to unfold, there also were concerns as to whether or not Israel was going to be able to go into Gaza and to be able to locate and to dismantle Hamas. But I think everyone's seeing that they're progressing at a much faster rate than anyone had expected. But still, as we see now, the reports that are coming out of Gaza, as Israel reports what they're accomplishing, there certainly is concern and doubt.
Do you believe it is a militarily, potentially successful goal to eliminate Hamas?
Well, certainly with any terrorist group and organization, it's not just the individuals that are operating it that you have to look at. It's also its function, its structure, its finances, its weapon systems, its command and control. Those are things that certainly Israel has the ability, and they are prosecuting the war to that, so they can significantly diminish Hamas's ability to conduct attacks on Israel, and also give the Palestinians an opportunity to bridge to some other form of government in Gaza. The Palestinians in Gaza are just as much a prisoner and certainly victims of Hamas as we're seeing with the effects on Israel.
I want to ask you about threats here at home, but very quickly, have you seen intelligence to back up some of the reporting that says some of these Hamas attackers who were just so brutal that they were actually on an amphetamine called Captagon? I know some of your Republican colleagues are trying to take action. Was that a factor here?
I've not seen intelligence specifically about that. Like you, I've seen the news reporting, and it's certainly very troubling because it certainly shows the viciousness of the attack.
Here at home, the FBI director, I know, recently testified that foreign terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, have issued specific calls to attack the U.S. How do you understand the threat to the homeland now?
This is very unusual for the FBI director to so publicly make these statements. And certainly in his conversations with the Intelligence Committee, they've been on an unclassified basis. So we have the ability to talk about it. It certainly shows the extent to which these threats are troubling the director. And what he's indicated specifically is that more than a decade, the increase in terrorist threats to the United States inside the United States is at its highest ever. And he cites the chaotic withdrawal of Afghanistan and our loss of intelligence gathering there. He cites the southern border and individuals who are allied with international terrorist organizations that have crossed the border. Those are two Biden administration policies. So for the FBI director to cite those as threats where the threats are emanating certainly shows you how important these statements are.
Okay. So what would it take to get you on board with supporting some sort of overhaul of border policy? I know that in the Senate they're talking about trying to bundle together some of these initiatives.
Well, I think they should be bordered together, and I've been at the White House several times talking about what we call sort of the Quad national security package, where they're looking at Ukraine, Taiwan, East Asia, but border has to be a part of it, and not just funding for the border. It needs to be policy changes. Our border needs to be secure. The FBI director has specifically cited that individuals come across that border allied with international terrorist organizations are a threat internal to the United States.
So Congress went home for the next few weeks, and you got a lot of work to do before the end of the year. One of those things potentially is reauthorizing Section 702, which allows agencies to gather data like phone calls and text messages from foreign nationals abroad. Some of your Republican colleagues like Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz have said they don't like Section 702. Is the Republican-controlled House going to reauthorize this, and when?
Absolutely. The problem is that there's a bunch of misinformation out there. What you just said is absolutely correct. 702 allows the collection of foreigners outside the United States who pose a national security threat to the United States. We have to continue to collect that data and information. It's from which we are able to keep our country secure. And certainly in that, we also capture those inside the United States, like those terrorists who come across the southern border that the FBI talks about as being a threat here. Their communications outside the United States with those terrorist groups and organizations, so we can track them down and prevent those attacks. This is absolutely essential. This is our post 9/11 structure. As our national security threat increases, we have to make certain that we maintain the tools that have kept us safe.
And just to clarify here, I know that Border Patrol has said there are people who've come across the border whose names match the terror watch list, but that doesn't necessarily represent a terrorist or a suspected terrorist, just for anyone who's concerned there.
But the FBI director has specifically said that there are individuals that are allied with international terrorist organizations who have come across the border that pose a threat. Yeah. That's the part of what his last 2 weeks of public statements have been.
I want to ask you about classified documents because CBS has been reporting that Special Counsel Robert Hur is near the end of his investigation into President Biden and his alleged mishandling of classified info. If there are indeed no charges brought, which is what we are reporting, what do you think the signal will be to the national security world?
Well, this will be certainly devastating, continuing to be devastating to the Department of Justice and to the Biden administration with their two-tier system of justice. Biden has been found to be a serial classified document hoarder over a 10-year period. He's been taking classified documents, some of the most sensitive that threaten our national security, home without any protection and certainly, able for others to be able to access them. There needs to be consequences. The fact that Hillary Clinton, who had, over 100 classified documents at home with the Secretary of State, and Vice President Biden, both under Obama at the same time, were taking classified documents home and certainly had them be vulnerable with no consequences, shows the Department of Justice is not pursuing Democrats.
Well, as you know, there is a difference with the case against President Trump, who refused to hand over documents fully and violated the Espionage Act. That's the charge against him because he didn't work with the government to hand those over.
Biden had these documents for over 10 years. You can't hoard documents in your home for a decade-long period, concealing them, taking them home as a senator and vice president, and then suddenly say, hey, 2 weeks while I was president, I cooperated, and therefore, it doesn't count that I spent 10 years as a serial classified document hoarder.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Thanks, as always, for joining us.
Thank you, Margaret.
We go now to the Deputy National Security Advisor, John Feiner. Good morning.
Good morning, Margaret.
I know hostage diplomacy is extremely delicate. We've been close to a breakthrough before and then fallen apart. But this morning, Qatar's prime minister says we are close enough to reach a deal, and the differences are just logistical at this point. Does the U.S. share that assessment?
What I can say at this point is we share the assessment that many areas of difference that previously existed have been narrowed, that we believe we are closer than we have been to reaching a final agreement, but that on an issue as sensitive as this and as challenging as this, the mantra that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed really does apply, and we do not yet have an agreement in place. And so until that is the case, we're not going to lay out all the details in public.
So Israel's prime minister said on CBS recently that they had intelligence indicating that there were hostages at Al-Shifa Hospital, but none were found. There were 2 bodies found nearby. Did the U.S. share the assessment that hostages were being held at the hospital? Because there was a release suggesting that from declassified intelligence the U.S. shared. Was the U.S. assessment wrong?
So what I am going to tell you is what we have put out in terms of intelligence that we have been able to share and that we've been able to downgrade on Al-Shifa. And look, this is a microcosm of the challenges associated with this entire conflict, because this is obviously a hospital where there are patients who are being treated, the most advanced hospital in Gaza, also a place where innocent civilians have gathered during the course of this conflict, and all of those innocent lives are sacred to us, equal in value to lives anywhere that are innocent. We have also said and been quite clear that we have intelligence information, not just Israeli intelligence, but American intelligence, that Hamas has used this facility to build terrorist infrastructure, to do command and control for combat operations. And we've been quite clear about that, but we have also said that none of that authorizes, in our view, direct military strikes from the air or on the ground against that hospital. So that is the complicated knot that the Israeli Defense Forces find themselves in, and that is how we are advising them to proceed at this point.
Right. The downgraded assessment shared by the White House said the U.S. believes that there could be, in Al-Shifa Hospital, a command node and tunnels underneath, and that in the past, these hospitals have been used to hold hostages. That's why I was asking you, since none were found there, if the U.S. actually thought there would be hostages there. There has been no
One thing I'd say about that, Margaret, is that facility is still being exploited by the Israeli Defense Forces. I expect you'll see more information in the coming days. I think we feel confident in the information that we put out, and let's see what their investigation reveals and where it leads.
Israel's prime minister was on this network this week and told my colleague Nora O'Donnell that they are trying to cause minimal civilian casualties, but, quote, unfortunately, we're not successful. Given that acknowledgement by Israel, I wonder if the administration is applying the Leahy Act here that would allow for the United States to restrict some military equipment based on human rights basis. Is Israel exempt from that, given what's happened and what Israel is acknowledging? Do you need to change that?
No countries are obviously exempt from laws of armed conflict or from U.S. statutory restrictions, but beyond that, I'm not going to say more. What I will say, though, is we have been quite clear that Israel has every right to defend itself against the threat that it faces. That includes, by the way, the right to go after Hamas leadership, who they say now have fled to the southern part of Gaza and have sought refuge there. So in the event that we believe that Israel is likely to embark on combat operations, including in the south, we believe both that they have the right to do that, but that there is a real concern because hundreds of thousands of residents of Gaza have fled now from the north to the south at Israel's request. And we think that their operation should not go forward until those people, those additional civilians, have been accounted for in their military planning. And so we will be conveying that directly to them and have been conveying that directly to them. They should draw lessons from how the operation proceeded in the north, including lessons that lead to greater and enhanced protections for civilian life, things like narrowing the area of active combat, clarifying where civilians can seek refuge from the fighting. But I'll also reiterate that Hamas takes no such precautions. In fact, openly and wantonly flouts and almost brags about its desire to perpetrate war crimes. And so this is an adversary that does not hold itself to the standard that we and others believe is essential.
Understood. Hamas is extremely brutal. I want to quickly ask you about President Biden's op-ed that he published in the Washington Post. He said the U.S. is prepared to issue visa bans against extremists. He was referring to Israeli settlers moving into the West Bank. Does that threat have teeth, given that there are estimates that American citizens make up as much as 15% of the settler population?
Look, the president has been extremely clear, I think, far beyond even what many of his predecessors said about our concerns about developments on the West Bank, and in particular our concerns about violence perpetrated against innocent Palestinians by extreme settlers. He said that in public speeches. He said that in an op-ed that he's published just this weekend. And as he indicated, and as we are now moving to operationalize, that could include consequences that the U.S. would impose on people associated with violence against innocents in the West Bank, including a ban on them being able to travel to the United States on visas. And we're moving in that direction, and we'll have more to say about that, I'm sure, in the coming days.
Understood. John Feiner, thank you very much for your time this morning. And Face the Nation will be back in a minute, so stay with us.
Wow. What a mess. What a mess.
be with you,
in
Margaret.
person. A lot to talk to you about today, but I want to quickly just ask you, since Congress just went home for the better part of 2 weeks, they haven't reauthorized a lot of things, and they haven't passed the supplemental for Israel, for Ukraine, Taiwan. Is that going to get done before the end of the year?
We have to get it done by the end of the year. We have to pass the supplemental request, which includes, as you say, desperately needed military assistance for Ukraine, support for Israel, humanitarian assistance, as well as support for our partners in the Indo-Pacific region. One of the issues, as I'm sure you know, that's being discussed is trying to get something done with respect to border security and immigration reform, and there are ongoing bipartisan discussions as we speak.
I understand that's happening through the recess.
That's true. That is.
For the border. Do you know, I mean, is it really realistic, though, that that's a very hard issue, that that's going to get done before 2023 is up?
Well, there are good faith negotiations going on. Whether they get done or not, I don't know. But let me just say, it seems to me that given the desperate situation in Ukraine, it is irresponsible for people to say that we're going to allow Putin to continue his assault on Ukraine. And only going to provide that assistance if we get a deal on something else. I want to get a deal on immigration reform, but it doesn't make sense to me to connect the two.
So you wrote a letter this month endorsing more funding for Israel, but also pressing the Biden administration on its assessment of whether these military goals are actually achievable and how that country is protecting civilians. Are you satisfied with what the White House has told you?
We're still awaiting a public response from the Biden administration. We've not received that public response yet. We have had outreach at the highest levels, and we've been offered, those of us who signed the letter, to meet with the president's top national security and foreign policy team to discuss some of those issues. But we are still waiting an answer to the letter because we asked a lot of questions that we think are important to get answers to.
This is hurting the president with his fellow Democrats, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's hurting the president with fellow Democrats. I do think it's important that the president speak out more clearly on this issue. Let me say this. In the aftermath of the horrific Hamas attacks of October 7th, you have, I think, virtually every senator supporting Israel's objective of going after Hamas and neutralizing them from a military perspective. No more October 7th. Right. But we also need to do, as Secretary Blinken said, see how Israel conducts this operation is important. And so many of us were concerned just a few weeks ago when one of the White House national security spokesperson was asked if the United States has any red lines. And the answer was no, which means anything goes. And that cannot be consistent with American interests and American values. So that's why we're asking these questions.
It can't be consistent because that's not the policy for any other country that the United States provides military aid to.
Well, look, that's right. Look, we have a policy of trying to make sure that our funds are used in a manner that advances our interests and our values. And if you look at what's happening right now in Gaza, the desperate humanitarian crisis, clearly that's more that could be done. And if you look at the level of civilian casualties, Secretary Blinken himself has acknowledged that there are additional measures that the Netanyahu government can take to reduce the high level of civilian casualties, 2/3 of them children. So this is why we're asking the president questions. We want to work with the president to get more assurances that our interests and values will be protected.
Okay, we have to take a break, but I want you to stay here with us for more Face the Nation.
Filters, and it really makes it fit the decor of your home.
Holiday. For the very latest on the presidential elections, go to the CBS News YouTube page. Our senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is hosting a new weekly review of the latest developments in the 2024 race for the White House. We'll be right back.
Yourself or a loved one or Amazon.
It's a story of heroism you have to hear to believe.
We saved all of our lives.
Firefighters battled the deadliest American wildfire in 100 years. How did they survive tonight?
I wake up.
A home like.
Hard to separate the shows from the commercials.
Welcome back to Face the Nation, and we have more questions now for Senator Chris Van Hollen. Senator, I want to pick up on something you've been raising concerns about for a while. Going back to July, I found a letter where you were saying to the White House you had concerns about the more than $3 billion in security assistance to Israel because you thought taxpayer money should not shield settlers who are attacking and burning Palestinian villages with impunity. Last night, the president started very publicly saying he's going to start trying to crack down. What do you think of this plan to restrict visas?
I was pleased to hear the president say what he said, and I fully support the president's plan to restrict visas from people who have a record of violence against innocent people. So I think that's an important first step. As you know, extreme settler violence against Palestinians has been an issue for a very long time. We've seen a huge spike in extremist settler violence since the Gaza war started, as people have been focused on the war there. 500% increase. The Palestinians have been killed by extremist settlers, their houses burned down, pushed out of villages, olive orchards chopped down in the middle of the olive season, which is the #1 income producing time for a lot of these villagers. So this is a big, big problem. Remember, in the Netanyahu coalition, you have some very extreme members. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir. One of them, belongs to the successor party to the Kahanis party, a party that was on the U.S. terrorist watch list. Right. So this is why it's very important for the United States to weigh in and weigh in strongly. I'm glad to see the president do what he did.
And they were in the government well before October the 7th.
That's right.
Just quickly, you've made some statements that being pro-Israel doesn't require being anti-Palestinian and vice versa. Why do you think that's a controversial statement?
Well, it shouldn't be, right? Because you can be both pro-Israel, as I am, and also pro-Palestinian and support Palestinian rights and aspirations to self-determination and a homeland of their own. In fact, the president's vision, when he sees some light maybe at the end of this dark tunnel, has been a two-state solution. Israel living securely with a Palestinian state as a neighbor, where Palestinians have equal dignity and full rights. And one of the problems with what's happening on the West Bank right now is when you push Palestinians off of their lands, you make it even harder to have a two-state solution. You strengthen Hamas, you weaken the Palestinian Authority, and you make it harder. So I was disappointed to see Prime Minister Netanyahu smack down President Biden's call for a two-state solution. This is going to mean that President Biden has to do even more to put forward a clear vision of how we're going to emerge from this very dark tunnel into a brighter future.
I think we all hope for a brighter future. Senator, thank you very much for your time today. And we're going to turn now to Jordan's ambassador to the United States, Dina Kouar. Ambassador, good to have you here.
Thank you very much,
in person. So before the war, there were more than 2 million children in Gaza. Estimated 4,600 have been killed in the past few weeks. And for those who do survive, many of them are disabled. I wonder what you think this does to the security of the region to have these next generations so impacted.
Margaret, the images we're seeing out of Gaza are not the same images that the United States is seeing on the mainstream media. We're watching our social media, and everybody in the Arab world is doing the same. The images are flabbergasting and very, very sad. When you see parents looking for the remains of their dead kids in supermarket bags, or you're seeing children looking for parents or any familiar face because they're left alone in this world. Now, after the 11,500 dead, the majority are women and children, for sure. And this is asking ourselves, like 17,000 to 18,000 children are going to be orphans. What do we do with that? Some studies have shown that some of the Hamas, the majority of Hamas fighters were orphans. So our call here is for a ceasefire. The Jordanian government is asking for a ceasefire, and His Majesty has spoken about the importance of going to a ceasefire. Not because we want to think differently from the rest of the world, but because we feel that with the Arab countries and with the Islamic countries, this is the only way forward to stop this war and to sit around the table and go back to negotiations. The humanitarian situation in the West Bank is beyond. And right now, what is worrying us is the UNRWA reports that are coming out of Gaza. Yeah, UNRWA is the one on the ground, and they've lost 103 people out of them. You've lost 49 colleagues as journalists. We've lost 200 people from the medical health system. And UNRWA is worried because out of the 154 centers they have in the West Bank, in Gaza, they are inundated with around 830,000 IDPs. These IDPs came from the north to the south because they were asked. Yes. Right. And these displaced people were asked to leave the north in no time to go to the south. And now they're asked to leave the south. Didn't anybody think that if Hamas is in the north, they would go to the south? Didn't anybody think that this military strategy is going to work? So our worry is that this violence is going just to breed violence, and it's putting pressure in the region. And if you cannot talk to the moral compass of the world, nor to the humanitarian feelings, let's talk strategic thinking. And that's where we're going.
Well, and I want to go there with you as well. We should say that estimated 4,600 children, that's from the Gaza Health Ministry, but no one has an accurate assessment, including the United States government, because they can't actually get in there and count bodies. Yeah. But it is a tremendous amount of death. Your government has had to airdrop in medical aid to some of the personnel you do have on the ground. I understand there was an attack against a field hospital. Yeah. Who carried it out? What happened? Okay, we have a hospital, a military hospital south of Gaza City, and now we're going to have a second one in the south of Gaza. Now, the one that was struck was there's a mosque next to the hospital, and the Israeli military bombarded that mosque, and people were running because they were injured, running to the hospital. And as our military people came out to help them, they got also hit. So we had 7 injured, and now they're okay. They've been taken care of. But we do not find it normal that all the hospitals are attacked. We do not find it normal that we're attacking civilians and a collective punishment. This cannot go on, Margaret. This cannot go on. It's not solving the problem. So now there's a third hospital in the West Bank as well. Also concerning the West Bank, because we're talking about Gaza a lot, just one word about the fuel shortage in Gaza. It is getting so complicated that we are worried about the health hazard in Gaza. The WHO, the World Health Organization, is warning that if there is no fuel coming in, it's going to be a problem for the sewage system, for the water pumping, desalination. Yes. And dogs are eating bodies because not everybody is able to put people into burial mode. So we need to worry about this, because otherwise we will have diseases that we didn't have before. We need to get more openings. Yeah. And our charity, the Hashemite Charity Organization, is working a lot on getting these aid. And we're calling upon the world that is wanting to help to either help UNRWA, that is on the ground, or buy items that are in the country, whether in Egypt or Jordan, to help to send to. Let me ask you, because Jordan.
I don't know if y'all caught that or not, to my viewers. She was saying that animals are starting to eat the bodies because the bodies are laid out so predominant that the animals now are feeding off of the dead. To give you any kind of an idea of what kind of environment that all that is turning into.
With Israel for 30 years. You have trade, you have all sorts of contact with them. Do you worry that the next generation of Jordanians or the surrounding countries will not be able to maintain the peace that they have had for decades because of what's happening now?
Well, there's a lot of pressure.
Is it destabilizing?
I wouldn't say the word destabilizing, but it is putting a lot of pressure on His Majesty and on the government because people are angry. They see the images every day. I mean, we're all angry. It's very humiliating. It's very hurtful, and it's inhuman. And we're just wondering how far is this going to go. We're calling for a ceasefire. We're calling to go back to negotiations. And as the senator said, the only way to be pro-Israeli is to ask for peace, and the only way to be pro-Palestinian is to ask for peace. And this is common grounds for both of us. So we need to go further on that. And on the settlers, just as a word in the West Bank, the settlers are going haywire, unhinged, and are not caring about the law, and nobody's able to stop them. Every day there are 8 attacks on Palestinians, and they are mistreating them, humiliating them, sending videos all over social media of them naked and in situations that are unacceptable. They are attacking also the Armenian quarters. They're attacking Christian worshippers in Jerusalem. So we're wondering how much more do they need to do to be stopped. So I was very happy, and we were very happy to see the op-ed of the president. We're very grateful that he mentions the issue of the settlements and that they need to think about the civilians and stopping of the killing.
We'll see if there's more on that this coming week, as the White House has promised. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
It's a bad deal. Bad deal. Any way you look at it, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal. That's all in the blame of Satan coming down and committing all this wrath.
Now to the chairman and ranking member of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Republican Mike Gallagher, and Democrat Raja Krishnamurthy. Good morning to you both, gentlemen. We like bipartisan conversations on this program, so welcome back.
Good morning.
So
Great to be here.
I want to put it to you both, Ben. Can you work together to pass this, $4 billion President Biden is asking for Taiwan and Asian allies before the end of the year? Congressman Gallagher, Republicans are in control, so I'll go to you first.
I think we can, and I want to salute the ranking member for his leadership in setting the serious tone that our committee has been operating under. The rest of Congress has been descending into what looks like a high school reality TV program, but we've been able to work together, and so that gives me a lot of optimism, particularly in light of the growing threat to Taiwan. One thing that went almost unreported amidst Biden and Xi's summit is that Xi tripled down on his threats to Taiwan. He reportedly said to the president in their meeting that peace and stability in the region are less important than solving the Taiwan question. The CCP's official statement afterwards said that we need to stop arming Taiwan and support their reunification efforts. So all of this should remind us that no amount of relentless diplomacy will make a difference if we don't fix the fundamental problem, which is that the balance of hard power across the strait and throughout the Indo-Pacific region is eroding, and with it, the risk of war is increasing, which is why we need to act before it's too late.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, you're confident before the end of 2023 this is going to pass?
We have no choice. We have to pass this. The president is absolutely correct to ask for this funding, not only for Taiwan, but for Ukraine, as well as Israel and other priorities. They're all inextricably linked. We have to make sure that we send the right message to Xi Jinping. Now, a recent survey showed that a majority of voters believe that a war is possible in the next 10 years. And they're very concerned about it. 3/4 of Democrats and Republicans want us to prevent war. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we deter aggression by equipping Taiwan with what it needs to prevent aggression, but also to tone down the rhetoric and make sure that we have diplomacy with the highest levels of the CCP.
Tone down the rhetoric in an election year, no less. Congressman Gallagher, I read that you want to subpoena potentially the main sponsors of a dinner that Xi Jinping attended with some of the biggest CEOs in the United States, CEOs from Blackstone, KKR, Pfizer, Boeing, FedEx, Apple, BlackRock. What do you seek to achieve there? Don't you know the names of everyone who bought tickets?
Well, I never mentioned a subpoena, so I don't know where that report is coming from. I'll comment broadly on the dinner, which I thought was disgusting. Well, Bloomberg got it wrong in this case. $40,000 to eat coffee rubbed flank steak and sip cake bread Sauvignon Blanc with Xi Jinping. And what's worse than that is the fact that they gave him a standing ovation. This, a communist dictator who's committed a genocide in Xinjiang, who's committing a cultural genocide in Tibet, who has completely destroyed civil society in Hong Kong, who's risking, as we just talked about, provoking World War III, to give him a standing ovation. And what's even worse than that is it wasn't just the people you'd expect, like Tim Cook from Apple or BlackRock. It was American defense contractors. All the more reason why Congress, I think, needs to step up to cut off the flow of U.S. capital to Chinese military companies, to specify the appropriate level of de-risking or diversification so we have a healthier economic relationship, to modernize our military, because corporate America and Wall Street have proven time and again they are willing to sell out American interests in order to make money in China.
But the two economies are so incredibly intertwined. I mean, the very fact that Rahm Emanuel, the president's ambassador to Japan, said these CEOs literally have their R&D, their intellectual property stolen from them, and they gave Xi Jinping a standing ovation. Doesn't that just tell you that China's greatest leverage here is financial, and the reality is that it's not going to be unwound?
Counterproductive.
Well, it has to be unwound, at least in part. I'm not arguing for a total decoupling. Go ahead, Ross. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that I think that even without any U.S. government action, I'm heartened that a lot of companies in the private sector are de-risking, are reducing their exposure in China. That particular dinner left a bad taste in my mouth. I don't think that people were paying $40,000 for the coffee-crusted steaks. They were paying for access. I hope that they also brought up some of our concerns with regard to economic aggression that the CCP is routinely practicing against American entities. For our part on the Select Committee, I want to just say I'm very glad to be working with Mike on ways to work with the Biden administration to reduce our investments in entities in China that are fueling the PLA's military modernization and human rights abuses. Thankfully, the Federal Thrift Savings Plan listened to us recently when they decided to remove investments in precisely those entities. So I think what we're doing on the committee is having a difference.
It's not no different than it would be for a bunch of lobbyists to go up here at Nashville and lobby for a law either to be changed or a law to be brought into play, because they're the ones with the big dollars and they're the ones that's going to, the squeaky wheel's the ones going to get greased the most. It's a very, very unfair, broken system that is working against the regular, common, everyday citizens and only working for the conglomerates. It's a three-ring circus as far as I'm concerned.
Congressman Gallagher and Krishnamurti, I want to ask you about what you thought was achieved at the summit, because expectations were set very low, right? Just answering the phone, military to military, and getting China to enforce some of its existing policies to cut down on the flow of fentanyl precursor chemicals. So do you both think this was a success, just to simply have the two leaders face to face?
Well, I welcome the establishment of a crisis communication channel in so much as it reduces the risk of miscommunication leading to war. I'm skeptical of the fentanyl agreement, I have to confess, only because we've seen this movie before, but certainly anything to reduce the devastating effects of that fentanyl is causing all across America would be welcome. My concern more broadly, and while I think it's too early to characterize this one way or the other, is that whenever we have summits like this, we tend to pay cash up front, but for the CCP, the check is always in the mail. And as I said before, the most important form of communication is the investments we make in our own hard power posture in the Indo-Pacific. And there we're simply not just moving hard enough. We've had two administrations now, different parties, that have failed to implement a deterrence by denial posture in the Pacific.
Congressman Krishnamurti, was it success?
Well, I think it was very promising. I think that the agreement with regard to cooperation on fentanyl is a good first step. I also like the establishment of the military-to-military communications channels. I quite frankly, I like the fact that Xi Jinping was pandering, and he's going to send a few pandas to the United States and increase commercial flights both ways. What I would have liked to see a little more is talk about the human rights abuses and the crackdown on Uyghurs, Tibetans, and dissidents in China. I'm hopeful that we can see more action on that particular score. But look, Margaret, the expectations for this summit were super low. As long as a Chinese spy balloon isn't flying over the U.S. now, following this latest meeting, I think that it's probably going to be viewed as having met expectations and exceeded them, probably.
The comments from Xi on the pandas was a little squishy too. It wasn't a hard commitment that everyone's getting their pandas back here. But Congressman, on the one thing that you have, as I understand it, subpoenaed was in regard to an illegal biolab in California. Your committee took this on. What did you discover, and what's your message to the administration?
Well, local officials in Reedley discovered this illegal biolab where there were transgenic mice, there was all sorts of equipment, there were vials containing Ebola, HIV, dangerous pathogens, and when they called the CDC and the FBI, they refused to investigate. The CDC hung up on them in many cases. We also discovered that the owner of the biolab, Jesse Hsu, was a fugitive. He was here illegally. He was fleeing a $330 million IP judgment against him, and he was receiving all sorts of unexplained wire transfers to the total of $2 million from China. He was a Chinese national. Bottom line is we just don't have appropriate tripwires in place. You can buy some of this stuff illegally online. We need to have a more robust defense in depth for biolabs like this. We can't allow this to happen again, and we need to support local officials, not hang up on them when they call the federal government.
Exactly.
Understood. More to talk about with you both. Thank you for your time today. We're going to have to leave it there. We'll be back in a moment.
Wow. I didn't know that was intense over in California with that biolab. Basically the same thing they had over in Ukraine.
Since Election Day on November 7th, more than a half dozen members of Congress have announced plans to retire, resign, or seek another job. This past week's stunning lack of civility on Capitol Hill may offer a glimpse as to why. A U.S. Senator, Oklahoma Republican Mark Wayne Mullen, challenged a testifying witness, a Teamsters boss, to a fight.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big
No,
guy.
stop it.
Is that your solution? Hold it. No.
Americans have enough contempt for Congress, Senator Sanders said. Let's not make it worse. The former Speaker of the House denied intentionally hitting one of the members who voted to oust him.
No, I did not elbow him. No, I did not elbow him.
I mean, it was just a clean shot to the kidneys.
This breakdown in discourse sparked comparisons to the 1850s, when pro-slavery Democratic House member Preston Brooks beat anti-slavery Republican Senator Charles Sumner unconscious. The nation was on the cusp of civil war then. It isn't clear what we're on the cusp of now. Former president and leading Republican candidate Donald Trump.
That's the reason why I say that the Civil War was not cut and dry pertaining to legalizing slavery, because slavery had already been legalized in 2 different states, and basically the confrontation that started in the White House dwindled down to the citizens, and that's whenever the citizens had to take it upon themselves toward trying to straighten the mess out.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
On stage at rallies, on TV, and on social media, inflammatory language is common. Rival Chris Christie derided it as TV tough guy talk.
When Ron DeSantis thinks it sounds tough by saying he's going to slit the throats of bureaucrats or shoot immigrants stone cold dead at the border, this is fundamentally unserious.
The FBI warned again this week of a heightened threat environment in the U.S. These protesters claimed to be in favor of Mideast peace, but they injured 6 Capitol Hill police officers outside Democratic committee headquarters. Violence the new Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, condemned as he defended the officers. It isn't clear how the safety of those very same officers will be impacted by his Friday release of the explicit security footage of the January 6th assault on the Capitol. A year out from a heated presidential race, let's all bring some civility back to our politics. The serious issues facing our country require it. We'll be right back.
A lot of controversy. A lot of fights, a lot of controversy, a lot of everything. And it ain't for the good, it's for the bad.
Or the word of God's living in you.
This discussion of Mark Milley, his belittling an attack on an 82-year-old man with a hammer that was almost fatal because he's the husband of a political enemy, or perceived political enemy. All of that, to me, is going to feed into the argument, and the idea that you're going to say, and it should sort of ignore the reality that this is a candidate who's embracing violence, and what judge wants to have on their conscience that they're going to have allowed this to happen. Because as sure as we're sitting here, this is going to repeat. There is a woman currently criminally charged for threatening to kill the district judge on this case. So this is really a refutation of Donald Trump's lawyers' argument that this is just speculative. That's what they're arguing. And it's just not the case.
It is. Very quickly in our remaining seconds, what do you think the headline is going to be out of tomorrow, if you were to guess?
These are three really respected judges. They've all worked at the Justice Department. I suspect that they will ask really tough questions of Trump because he is dangerous and he's generated the very best evidence against his position on the gag order. So I think the headlines tomorrow will read, Judge is very skeptical of Donald Trump's appeal.
Well, we will be watching it. We'll be talking about it tomorrow night. Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal, thank you so much as always. Coming up, as we track some breaking news on a potential deal between Israel and Hamas on the release of hostages, I'll offer some perspective on what's happening inside the White House at moments like this. And later, my conversation with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, I'll ask him if more Democrats
standing in that city. He is live next with how much time he has to get out before it blows.
Right now, someone could be listed as the owner of your home and stealing thousands of dollars.
People are being brainwashed to think it's okay for Hamas to go and burn small children, infants, and slit their throats. It's okay to go ahead and do all of this vandalism in the name of wokeism or whatever your political agenda is. I have a political agenda. I talk about politics every single day. I don't break windows, I don't spray paint, I don't do anything, and I don't hurt small children because that's not the right thing to do. But we have this pro-crime, progressive agenda that's making it okay to commit crime. It's making it okay to have no respect. It's an attack on families, an attack on children, and an attack on America as we know it.
I know. I feel like the fundamental family is non-existent at this point, and that's why we're seeing such a breakdown, and such a degradation of society. Let's go to you, Lieutenant. New York City reducing their police force now even further. The mayor of New York City claims crime is under control based on the statistics. But of course, statistics, they look great. You know, you can make them look great however you want. And also, it seems like the police are being told to stand down and no one is getting arrested for anything. I mean, here in New York City, I don't have to tell you, you can have a needle in your arm and they just keep on walking.
Absolutely. We've removed societal norms. We've removed things that children would normally know and teens and adults would know they would be arrested for. We have protests every night when mass transit's being shut down, streets are being shut down, bridges are being shut down, and absolutely nothing's being done about it. And we're told these are peaceful protests. And they're masked Most of these people are masked. These are things that you would have been arrested for prior in New York City. There's zero fear of consequence. Even when they are arrested, the arrest is just the initial part of the criminal justice system. It then moves on to the district attorneys to prosecute, and further on to a judge. And we see a huge breakdown in all three of those aspects of criminal justice. And that's why we're seeing a lawless society. This is what we allow.
Right? It's the majority of these people that are committing the crimes, they're the repeat offenders. They make a minority of the population. But why does the majority of the population have to suffer for this small group of people? Now, Angel, some blue cities have gotten the message that defunding the police, it simply doesn't work. In Portland, they increased police funding after a record number of murders there. In Philadelphia, the police budget was increased after lawmakers initially slashed it following the killing of George Floyd. Angel, what do you think it's going to take for Democrats to wake up and allow the cops to do their jobs? Take the handcuffs off the cops and put them on the criminals where they belong.
I don't know what it's going to take. The police are the first line of defense. In New York City alone, the NYPD assaults on police officers are up 21%, right? You have rogue judges and these activist district attorneys who are not holding people accountable. They've made to raise the age law, right? These kids now 18 years old. Guess what? The criminals, the drug dealers, the gangbangers that the left loves to defend under the guise of social justice, guess who they're giving their drugs to the hole? Guess who they're giving their guns to the hole? Guess who they're sending out to be stick-up kids? These young kids under the age of 18. I don't know what it's going to take. People have to go out and vote. They have to fire these politicians. You have Mayor Adams, who's been absent. He hasn't given a presser to call for these assaults on his police officers to stop. Right? The majority of the New York City Council touts themselves as police abolitionists. I mean, what's it going to take? I don't know. I wish I had the answer.
I wish I did too. Angel, John, and Rich Valdez, keep it right here. We'll talk to you again more. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. All right. We got a lot more Sunday agenda coming up. The latest wins and losses for former President Trump and his seemingly never-ending legal battles, the witch hunt that'll never end. I'm Lydia Serrana.
No law and order on our streets. No law and order on our streets. It's really sad.
Halloween for animals to eat because they love them, and I can attest to this because I have a friend who has goats out in Colorado, and she got a whole bunch of pumpkins that a store gave her after Halloween, and the goats went crazy for them. They're just like the stuff that's not the freshest, but goats and pigs, all kinds of stuff. If you have undecorated pumpkins, everyone's like, don't throw them out because a lot of farms would love the pumpkins as a treat for their animals. And that's what they're telling everybody. Like, pigs love it, goats love it, everybody loves it. And they said that the animals know that it's a special treat and it's like candy for them. And it's a way to get rid of your old pumpkins without, just throwing them away. Because otherwise they don't get them because they'd have to buy them. And that can be a lot for those animals. A Springfield man is charged for kidnapping a woman at Chainsaw Point in the Ozarks, Springfield, Missouri. Charges were filed against a man after he allegedly kidnapped a woman at Chainsaw Point, like by chainsaw. Roy Flores is charged with kidnapping, first degree burglary, and unlawful use of a weapon. They say the incident happened earlier this spring, and he would forced his way into a home with a chainsaw, kidnapped her, also threatened to burn the house down. Jeez, with the chainsaw. We have a lot more on the way. Stick with us. More than
Cheapers.
$79.56 over 10 years.
This country's out of control.
For an investment of about $1 a day.
This country's out of control.
May talk about the Republicans and how bad they're doing, but at least they have their debates. They're fighting, between themselves to try to get a position here.
It's out of control.
That hospital as a death zone. They found 80 bodies in a mass grave and several patients who had died as a result of medical services shutting down.
My God.
So the pause in the fighting would allow a much needed influx of medical aid. That's a great thing. And of course, the release of any hostages would be incredible news. But if you're sitting in the White House right now and you're looking to resolve this conflict, there are still larger challenges ahead. Up next, what does one of the most prominent Jewish lawmakers in the country think about Donald Trump echoing the words of Hitler? You'll find out in my wide-ranging interview with Governor J.B. Pritzker. And later, Botox, a holiday in the Hamptons, and a Hermes shopping spree. You might think I'm describing...
That's cool. I believe more dive schools within Mozambique could probably do a better job at bringing more Mozambicans to the forefront of the scuba industry.
Exactly.
Ultimately, I think that any goal for any business within a Mozambican environment should be to have it be Mozambican-led and to have the dive industry saturated with Mozambican instructors.
So because you don't want to get any water inside your mask, good?
That's what we're trying to achieve. It's taking a little bit longer than we would expect, but we're definitely getting there. And hopefully that other schools throughout the country also jump onto that wagon and try and make that a bit of a priority too.
It's really important because it's a kind of new thing for the Mozambican people, because we know that there's not many Mozambican people that
I have no idea what they're talking about.
To the hospital where she died shortly after her arrival. Authorities have not yet determined her cause of death. Now, Swift postponed Saturday's show when the heat index, that's the combination of air temperature and humidity, hit nearly 140 degrees. Imagine how hot that felt. Taylor also shared her heartbreak over the fan's death, writing on social media, quote, "I can't believe I'm writing these words, but it is with a shattered heart that I say we lost a fan earlier tonight before my show. I can't even tell you how devastated I am by this." She added, "I want to say now I feel this loss deeply, and my broken heart goes out to her family and friends. This is the last thing I ever thought would happen when we decided to bring this tour to Brazil." Now, the Brazilian entertainment company who organized Swift's show in Rio de Janeiro announced it will carry out a special action plan that involves new free water distribution points during this public event.
Wow, something so joyous to have this happen.
No.
Just tragic. Christina, thank you. Molly?
Protesters here, as well as around the globe, taking to the streets, showing support for Palestinians and calling for a ceasefire after Hamas attacked Israel. Now an Israeli activist is calling to investigate pro-Palestinian groups, and she joins us next.
The community and the ocean.
Thinking.
I still don't know what all that was about.
Has been lifted, citing constitutional concerns of restricting Trump's free speech. So, Joseph, now that we see already something being turned over by the appellate, clearly, I have this bad feeling that this case will not go Trump's way because this judge is clearly biased in this case. Do you think he could win on appeal?
You know, I don't have a lot of faith in the appellate process. I think that the ruling that we got regarding the gag order is kind of a throwaway. I think that if you look at the last 40 years of appellate court decisions, you'll see that the decisions have sought to narrow, undermine, and obfuscate our constitutional rights. So I think that a lot of times people don't know about appellate courts, and they're some of the worst biased rulings that you will ever get that set the tone for many other judges.
See, that's some good information right there. Now, Katie, this fraud case, it's not the only legal battle Trump is facing. Fortunately, just the other night, Colorado court ruled that the former president will be allowed on the state's ballot for 2024. But that judge also said that Trump was guilty of an insurrection. I mean, he's never been charged with an insurrection. And that case is just one of at least 31 suits filed across the country that argue Trump should be disqualified, citing the 14th Amendment and all hinging on that Trump committing insurrection. What do you make of this judge's actions to actually try and convict the president already?
Well, I think it's a very novel legal theory to use the 14th Amendment. And as you mentioned, Trump was not charged with insurrection. Jack Smith could have, and many people thought was considering that charge. It's nowhere on the charge sheet. But even more than that, there was an impeachment proceeding that dealt with essentially the same allegations, which obviously found Trump not convicted of the same things here. So I think a finding that he had committed an insurrection is something that is baseless, to say the least. Obviously, the decision that he would remain on the ballot was premised on the fact that the judge, even though he supposedly found he committed an insurrection, did not find that that applied to presidents, which I believe is accurate. But the underlying finding is based upon absolutely nothing. Obviously, the evidence was not strong enough for a prosecution and not strong enough for an impeachment. I think the Constitution would require more due process on that ground to actually affirmatively say somebody committed such an act. It's quite significant.
Right, and then
more decisive. There has to be a bigger.
Another study, most people had 90%.
Be clear. In Germany in the 1930s, people that they didn't want to have power, people that they wanted to separate and segregate, they began calling them immigrants. Even people who had been in Germany for generations, Jews who were doctors, lawyers in government at the time, became known as immigrants, even though they were German. And this is a way to begin to segregate people. And then eventually, at least what happened in Germany, is that they turned it into a way to almost dehumanize. And then they did, in fact, dehumanize and kill people. I don't know where it's going with Donald Trump. What I can tell you is the things that he talks about are frightening to those of us who know the history of Europe in the 1930s and 40s. And I'm deeply concerned about his predilection for revenge and what that will mean for, groups of people that didn't support him in the 2024 election, if in fact he gets elected.
He has, to your point, talked about political targeting, about going after his enemies. Do you think people are talking about that enough, other Democratic leaders?
No. And I repeat it wherever I go, that Donald Trump is dangerous for our democracy. He's dangerous for specific minority groups in the United States. And I think that, for those of us who have a platform to call it out, it is a requirement, in my view, for all of us to call it out, not just Democrats, by the way, Republicans too.
Do you
around the world are calling for one right now, and that includes here in London, where we saw several pro-Palestinian events this weekend. More spread out than we saw last weekend, Molly. You remember 300,000 pro-Palestinian protesters in London last weekend. Authorities arrested 120 people then because of clashes with counter-protesters. A group of students also walked out of class on Friday here in London in what was called a school strike for Palestine. Now take a look at this next video from Paris. Thousands of people marched through the city calling for an immediate ceasefire. Protests also happened this weekend in Glasgow and several cities in Australia, including Melbourne and Sydney. Thousands are protesting in Iran, where, of course, the government funds Hamas. You see pro-Palestinian protesters here in the capital of Tehran waving Palestinian flags and surrounding a dome that is also draped in a Palestinian flag. But you mentioned protests are also happening across the United States, including in New York and also Chicago, where protesters shut down part of Lakeshore Drive for 4 hours yesterday. Around 3,000 people protested in support of Palestinians. Organizers said they will continue protesting until a ceasefire is called in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will only agree to a temporary ceasefire in return for Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. We'll send it back to you, Molly.
Great points, Nate Foy. Thank you. Live from London. Eric?
You got it.
And as far as those pro-Palestinian protests are concerned, lots of questions now being raised about who exactly backs them and who funds them. On Capitol Hill last week, Israeli activist Noah Tisby called on the FBI to investigate who is providing the money for these pro-Palestinian organizations that have been protesting on the streets of our country. Some say they may be getting money from terrorist groups such as Hamas. Those claims unconfirmed. Florida, though, has already ordered the deactivation of one of those groups from college campuses, and the Virginia Attorney General is now investigating another one of those groups. Nora Tishby joins us now. She is the best-selling author and a former first-ever special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and delegitimization in Israel. Ms. Tishby, welcome. Thank you for joining us. What did you tell Congress last week about who's backing these organizations?
So thank you so much for having me. First, let me be clear. These are not pro-Palestinian demonstrations. These are pro-Hamas demonstrations. If you are pro-Palestinian, what you will do is actually help Israel get rid of Hamas. There are voices coming out from Gaza right now of Palestinian citizens that are finally able to communicate and explain that they have been used for years as a human shield for Hamas nefarious activity. This is what we're trying to communicate to the world now. What I was discussing in Congress this week, a couple of days ago, was that we have found out a few years ago already, this is not new material, that this anti-Semitism on campus is not some grassroots movement, and it's not a Palestinian grassroots movement. These are people that are connected to and sympathizers of Hamas. So the money is not coming from Hamas, it's coming from people that were found by the FBI around 2001 to have connections, to have fundraising in America for Hamas. Those people have changed the structure of their organization, and instead of sending money directly to Hamas, they have concluded correctly that our young American minds are susceptible to manipulation. And they have planted themselves on campuses using all these progressive code words like justice and freedom, but instead what they are after is dismantling the single Jewish state in the world by, as we've seen, all means necessary. So they're inciting violence. This is not freedom of speech. This is incitement of violence. And we have called on the Department of Education to investigate why these groups are allowed on campus, and the IRS to investigate them for money laundering, and the FBI to investigate them for connections to terrorism. These demonstrations, as we can see in America, are violent, they are aggressive, they are mean, they tear down American flags, and as I was saying, there's a direct line between tearing down posters of children that are hostages in Gaza to tearing down the American flags. This is un-American.
You talk about inciting violence, and I've covered some of these protests, and I actually heard pro-Palestinian, kill more Jews. That's, to me, pro-Hamas. That's pro-terrorist. Why do they say end the occupation? Hamas has occupied Gaza, not Israel, since 2005. Don't they get or know who is responsible for all of this, that Hamas has been in control?
The answer is no, they don't, because they have been brainwashed for nearly 2 decades to believe that Israel is the big bad wolf of the entire Middle East, which is, of course, we know is not the case. When you talk to those people and they ask them which river and which sea that needs to be free, they don't know what to say. They have no idea what the difference is between the PA and Hamas, between regular Palestinians and Hamas. They have never read the Hamas Charter. All you need to do is read the Hamas Charter to understand what it is that they are after. They're not saying kill all the Jews that are against us having determined. No, they say kill the Jews. Their intention is to slaughter as many Jews as possible. And we have to understand this culture of jihadism, this culture of radicalism is not going to stop if it ever gets its way with Israel. It's coming to the West, it's coming to Europe, and it's coming to the United States. And we need to really come to terms and have
It's already here. It's not coming. It's already here. Terrorism took the World Trade Center down, bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, and assassinated Marek Kahana in 1990.
And today on TikTok, we see young American kids.
Unbelievable.
Took the World Trade Center down.
Coming to Europe, and it's coming to the United States. And we need to really come to terms with Israel. It's coming to the West, it's coming to Europe, and it's coming to the United States. And we need to really come to terms and have
it's already here. It's not coming. It's already here. Radical Islamic terrorism took the World Trade Center down, bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, and assassinated Marek Kahana in 1990.
And today on TikTok, we see young American kids that are praising bin Laden. that they're reading the letter to America and they say, wow, bin Laden actually has such a point. It's not that bin Laden has a point. It's that this letter is saying exactly what they've been brainwashed with on campuses for nearly 2 decades by people with bad intent. And we need to stop this and stop this immediately. This is going against anything and everything that the West stands for, any liberalism, any progressivism, anything that we hold dear. We need to stop this and fight against this together.
Yeah,
This is some of the stuff that I've been talking about pertaining to the corporate church world here in America that has let the windmill ministries down to the degree that now they have let this fester. They've let it multiply to the degree that now we've got groups and kids out there that actually support bin Laden and the death to Americans that I never would have thought in a million zillion years, as much as I've had contact with Homeland Security and them trying to make me out to be the bad guy. I would never have thought that it was this predominant here in America, but it is. And if this is not an eye-opener to the church established world here in the Western world and throughout the rest of the world, I don't know what is. We are dealing with something that has now entered into the sacred chambers of our democracy, our sovereignty, and now it's exploding in different areas, like we're seeing all over the country, especially right here in America. Like the guy was talking about a while ago, the commentator to your left right there, it's already here. It's already here. This is in response towards what happened that shouldn't have happened in 1988 whenever 9 tapes went to the White House. That to this day, the Windmill Ministries missions still does not get a support team or a congregation or whatever you want to call them to be able to make reference to these facts. They can hide, they can cheat, they can lie, they can manipulate all they want. But eventually the truth will come out, and the truth, the Bible says, is what will set us all free. The truth will come out in this movement that began in the late 80s. Right here in West Tennessee. Not just in Northwest Tennessee, but West Tennessee. Because I work more areas than just Northwest Tennessee. I work down towards Jackson and other areas down towards Bolivar and Alamo and Brownsville and Millington and Halls and other areas down in there.
That have been mentioned, Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine. We've reached out to them. Haven't had any comment yet, but here's what CARE says about all this. Let me read you what they say. Quote, targeting Muslim and Palestinian American organizations with baseless and irresponsible smears threatens the safety of their staffers and communities they serve, from the McCarthy era to civil rights movement to the post 9/11 years. We have seen politicians use this playbook before. These witch hunts will not stand, God willing. Are these witch hunts, as CARE says, that you're smearing, people of goodwill?
What kind of human rights are they talking about? What if you're a woman in Gaza, what kind of human rights do you have? You have none of this. Those people are insane. There are over 239 hostages that are held right now in Gaza. Women and children, the youngest, the age of 9 months, or actually a few days, because a woman gave birth in Gaza in recent days. Yeah, there was a woman an Israeli woman that gave birth. To 85 years old. This is human rights. They need to stop this and stop this immediately. And SJP and AMP need to be stopped in America.
The computer cutting us off, but will not be cut off of the heinous cries and calls for killing more Jews from these protests that I've seen. Our coverage here on Fox News continues after this.
It's sickening. It is absolutely sickening in what we're seeing right here in America rise up And, you know, if you go back to looking at the history,
Americans are preparing to see family this.
if you look at the history of everything that went on before World War II, it was Nazism sympathizers that was preaching their doctrine, not just over there in Europe and Germany and other areas, but they was coming over here and preaching that same doctrine. That same doctrine had been introduced to the American people for about 10 or 15 years before World War II ever broke out. So they know exactly what they was doing. And we can see now the same characteristics in what happened then versus what's happening now. The differences is they didn't have social media and computers and internet and Google and all those other things back before World War II. Today, it's being used as a leverage. It's being used as a tool to advance this movement. And it's basically a weapon that's been weaponized against the American people. That's against this type of atrocities being committed not just on the Jews, but also on the Christians. It's awful that our politicians has led us down this way to the degree that now we're all vulnerable. It's awful. It's absolutely awful.
See family this week, of course, for Thanksgiving, and they could face some pretty serious delays. Dana Marie McNichol is at the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with more. To you.
Well, I can tell you right now we're seeing over 1,000 delays across the United States, about 30 cancellations according to FlightAware, but we do expect to see more because of a storm system pushing through central and eastern United States, bringing tornadoes, 60-mile-per-hour winds, even hail, as millions of Americans head to their Thanksgiving destinations. Now, the Fox Weather team says the worst day to travel is Tuesday, and TSA agents agree. They say the busiest days are Tuesday and Wednesday, and TSA says security checkpoints will be busier than ever this year, with roughly 30 million expected to be screened. Airport officials urge you to arrive 2 to 3 hours before your flight, and even earlier if the weather gets worse.
I was in check-in for about an hour and a half, just checking in my bag alone, which that's normally a 5 to 10 minute process.
Well, I'm absolutely confident I'm going to make my flight. My question is, please don't delay it or cancel it.
We got here about like 30 minutes ago, actually, and we're already almost at security. We're just kind of like winging it.
Now, over the next couple of days, if you're hitting the road, AAA suggests leaving in the morning or after 6 to avoid holiday traffic. Heavy rain has the potential to cause drivers significant delays on Monday. And back out live here at the airport, TSA's goal to keep those wait times under 10 minutes for PSA pre-check. Molly?
Oh, great point, Dana Marie McNichol. Thank you so much for all of that. Could be messy out there. We appreciate it.
I'm going to leave now for Thanksgiving. Man, oh man.
That's a great idea. I'll just start eating now. That's the trick.
Life, diabetes. There's no slowing. Unbelievable in what's happening and how it's happening. All these people that's getting on all these airplanes that's got money to be able to travel like this, you're just adding that much more carbon dioxide problems to the upper atmosphere and burning that much more fuel and oil and gas. So whenever you get to looking at the climate deniers, they can say whatever they want to say, but proof is in the pudding in how the citizens of this great planet is responding, especially during these holidays. Good luck to all of us as we end our program by saying, God bless America, God bless our troops, and God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here. Because we're definitely going to need it. Yesterday ended my recognition towards veterans. I went ahead and took down my flag and some of the other objects there that I had this summer on the project here at the Windmill Ministries Dragon Memorial. God bless and good luck to all of us. Shalom.